I have the honor to interview today Dr. DrAlanBarnard. We're going to talk about a lot of very interesting things. Obviously, I promise that we will reveal the secret of making better and faster decisions. Alan, you are one of the leading theory constraint experts and decision scientists in the world. Can you explain how these two are connected? What is the link between the bottlenecks and the decision making?
Sure. Hi, Ragne, and hi to all your viewers out there all around the world. My passion has always been around understanding, why some people succeed despite often having very challenging starting conditions, and why others fail when they had quite ideal starting conditions. And I realized it had to do with the type of decisions that we make. When I went to university, I studied industrial engineering. I've always been very interested also in computer science. So I've learned how to code quite young on. And then on the decision science side, I was interested in psychology. So I went and studied psychology as well. And then ended up doing a PhD in innovation and technology, trying to understand how your decisions, like allocating a scarce resource, how that can impact the success or failure. I was very lucky to have met somebody that became my mentor and great friend, Dr. Eli Goldratt, who's one of the leading scientists in the world. He's written one of the classic books of all time in management science called The Goal. And I'd started working with him after exiting corporate. I'd started my own business, and then I joined him. And in the early 2000s, we were already starting to work with really big companies, mostly Fortune 500 companies. And we were starting to ask ourselves a very simple question. For these very large companies, if you think about a Walmart or Cisco Systems or Microsoft, what is really constraining them from profitable growth? What's holding them back, or what's limiting? Where is their bottleneck? And what we realized was there was only one resource that satisfied the criteria for bottleneck. And a bottleneck is simply a resource that has less capacity than the demand that the system is putting on them. And we found only one resource in these companies that satisfy that criteria. So for the viewers out there, I want them to do a quick thought experiment with me. I want you to think about whether you're a business owner or whether you're a senior manager in a company. You might be a coach, doesn't matter. I want you to think about all the things that on a daily basis demands your attention or could benefit from your attention. So you can imagine sort of how long of a list that is. All the things that's demanding your attention on a daily basis or could benefit from your attention, both at work and at home. And now I want you to imagine your available attention, right? So this is the amount of stuff that's demanding our attention. This is the amount of available attention. One definition that's used in psychology for attention is it's undistracted time. So some people think about the ultimate bottleneck or constraint is our limited time, but attention is actually scarcer than time. You think about it, you have 24 hours a day, but how many hours do you have that's undistracted, that you can pay attention to those things that is meaningful to you, that you want to make progress on? And that was our big aha moment, is that the ultimate bottleneck, not just for these huge companies, but also for us as individuals, is our limited attention. So the link was that theory of constraints provide us with a very simple framework, sort of 5 steps that we can go through if we find a constraint in a system. So the first step is okay, once you've identified this constraint or bottleneck, the next step is decide how to better exploit it to not waste it, right? And what we realized very quickly on is that the way that we waste our attention is with 4 types of decisions that we make. The first one, as you mentioned, is we often do the wrong things. And by wrong, I mean things that are not helping us achieve more of the goals that we are really keen to achieve, and may even be harming us. So that's by far the first one, if you're thinking about an operations environment, the equivalent of doing the wrong things is essentially producing stuff, whether it's a product or service, that's not needed now. So you might run in a factory, you might run a minimum batch of 1,000 when your customers only need 200. So you don't realize that while you're working on that thing, 80% of your capacity is wasted doing something, producing something that's not needed now, and you're consuming raw materials and other scarce resources. If you think about a software development, and you can say, well, how can it apply in a software development environment, for example? If you think about an app like Excel, something that many of us use, or PowerPoint, what percentage of all the functions in that software do you think that people actually use?
Like 1%, I think.
Let's be a bit more optimistic and say it's 20%. It still means that the scarcest resource, which is these top software developers, right, are wasting 80% of their time, their limited attention, doing stuff that are not that important. And that to us was a big breakthrough, to say, okay, so the first thing that we have to do is to decide what we should stop doing. And in fact, on all the big projects that we do today, that's the first thing that we advise top management, is literally write down all the things that are demanding your attention, explain how this will help you make more money. And if you can't come up with a good explanation or how it will help you achieve the goals that are important to you, maybe you're an NGO, a not-for-profit organization. If you can't see how directly this is contributing, that's the first thing you need to do, is to stop doing that, because you need the attention and the budget to focus on the things that actually matter. The second decision that we make that also wastes our limited attention is we don't do the things that we know often could make a difference. So we procrastinate. And then what we find ourselves doing is having to explain to ourselves and others, why are we procrastinating? Why have we not yet done that? And that could be that book that I've always promised to write, or building that strategy document, that business plan, or deciding what is it that I need to focus on to make sure that my customers are willing to pay more or buy more. So that's the second big decision that we make that often wastes our attention, is we don't do the things we should, and then we have to explain why and develop recovery plans. The last two mistakes that we make is we do the right things, but we do them in the wrong way. We try to do everything at the same time. We multitask, right? So everything takes longer. We make much more mistakes and we get much less done. So that's mistake number 3. And the last mistake, which is my personal favorite, is you mentioned when we started that we're supposed to learn from experience, but we mostly don't. So the last mistake is we keep on repeating the first 3 mistakes, right? Both at work and at home and in our relationships. So that's a connection between theory of constraints and decision making, is that our ultimate constraint or bottleneck is our limited attention. If you're in a company, it's top management attention. And how they allocate that limited attention can be the difference between success or failure. If they waste it by focusing on people and things that don't matter, the business can fail. Even your small business can fail. If they know how to focus that attention on the things that could really make a difference, those high leverage opportunities that exist in every business, it can make a huge difference. One more comment on that might also be useful. When we run a for-profit, we have a very simple ratio that we can use to make decisions about what to focus on, right? We call it return on investment. But that ratio is based on a kind of an assumption that the scarcest resource in the business is cash or capital. So I want to allocate my cash or capital to those opportunities that gives me the best return. But what if management attention, our limited attention, is the constraint or the bottleneck? So I came up with a different ratio. I call it ROMA, or return on management attention. Or if it's just me, it's a return on my attention. So imagine you in a business, you have 2 opportunities. Both can give you a return of $1 million. Which one should I be focusing on? Well, if the first one requires 20 days of my attention and the second one requires 100 days of my attention, it becomes an easy decision, right? And it's the same thing like for how I apply it in my business. You know, our vision in our business, our goal is to help more and more people to make better, faster decisions when it really matters. And that's a constant ratio that I'm using to say, I've got limited attention. Where do I need to focus that limited attention that will help the most people make better, faster decisions, that rather than trying to help one person or two people or 10 people, how can I help 200 or 2,000 or 20,000?
You mentioned that your research labs focuses on identifying the most common decision mistakes we make in our personal lives and in business. Can you share what the main decision mistakes are and why we are making this?
Sure. So I'll share with you the ones that we focus on, and I assume many of your viewers and listeners have probably read the amazing book by Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner in economics. He wrote this book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it basically says that when we think, when we make decisions, we really have two systems of thinking. One is fast and automatic, system one, and the second one is slow and more deliberate, system two. And we would love to think that most of our decisions, especially the ones that really matters, are made with system two. In fact, most of the decisions that we make every day are made with system one, the fast and automatic mode of thinking. So using that as a frame of reference, what we did was we started looking at, so what are the decision mistakes that we can make? So when do we use our automatic way of thinking, system one, that we could really have benefited from slowing down our thinking and using system two? And of course, the other mistake is, when do we overthink things? You know, when we fall into this trap of analysis paralysis, something that's very common at the moment, if you think about this coronavirus out there, you know, there's so many uncertainties and unknowns out there, and people are constantly, you know, they get addicted to watch the news, watch social media to try and find that certainty or knowledge. And as soon as they think they know what to do now, they start second guessing themselves, and this can trigger this vicious cycle of worrying about worrying, right? That's kind of when you just should go with your gut and say, listen, despite the fact that there's many unknowns and many uncertainties, what are my options now? What's the simplest option? And the simplest option, act as if you have it, act as if everybody around you have it. You know, that's the simplest possible option. But to get back to the decision mistakes that we found, so the first one that we realize is when we make decisions that requires our intuition and judgment, those are the ones that are most difficult to make. Any decision that requires human judgment or intuition. But we don't realize to what extent our strong emotions impact that judgment. So the two subtypes in there is we often procrastinate because of an exaggerated fear of losing something that's important to us or gaining something that we don't want, you know, the effort or the risk. So if you think about somebody that might be, you know, addicted to smoking or maybe vaping, right? The reason why they don't stop is not because they don't know how good it will be for them if they stopped or how bad it will be if they continued. They have this fear of giving up something that they uniquely associate with the smoking or vaping, which might be to cope with stress. Or secondly, they might be afraid of maybe gaining weight if they stopped and replaced it with, you know, maybe eating. So that's the first one, is that we often procrastinate because of some exaggerated fear of loss, effort, or risk. And on the other side, we often overreact and make a bad change or choice because of some exaggerated frustration with our situation or an exaggerated expectation of the future. So we might quit our job thinking that, you know, becoming a coach is going to be fantastic because I can focus on my passion. But the reality is very cruel. You know, we did a recent survey and found out that up to 80% of people that are doing coaching today are earning less than what they would have earned if they had continued with their career. You know, so that's kind of the first mistake. And I'll share with you later on a little app that we've developed that can help you with that. The second one is where we become overwhelmed. So we know kind of the things that we have to do to improve our life or business, but because there's so many things, we get completely overwhelmed. And there, it can really benefit us if we start just saying, okay, so in order to achieve this goal, what are the absolutely necessary things that I have to do, those high leverage things, that a small change that can have a big impact. An example of that would be in my business. Imagine my sales is 100, maybe $100,000 or 100 million if I'm a big company, and my net profit is $5,000 or $5 million. If you think about what will a 1% increase in the average selling price do, and I can do that by just reducing my discounts by 1%, right? Well, my sales will go up by 1,000 or 1 million. My variable cost won't go up. My fixed costs won't go up. So that 1 will drop to the bottom line, and my profit will go from 5 to 6. That's a 20% increase for every 1% improvement that I can get in the average selling price. So those are the type of things that fall under this category number 2, where we get overwhelmed and we forget to stand back and say, all of these possible things I can change or improve, which are the ones that will give me the biggest upside if it works and the smallest downside if it doesn't. So that's mistake number 2. We get overwhelmed, and it would really help us to stand back and look at where will we get the biggest bang for our buck. The third one is really challenging because, the environments that we operate today are really complex. Even a small business, there's a lot of complexities, interdependencies. And what we tend to do is we tend to think that the local impact of a change or the short-term impact of a change is a good reflection on the total impact. So, I buy things locally, but I can buy them cheaper if I import them from China. So I think while I buy, 10,000 of these, I'll save $10, I'm going to save $100,000. But of course, I didn't consider the total cost impact of that, which means I have to now pay up front. I have to order 2, 3, 4 months supply at a time. What if there's a quality issue, etc. And there's today technologies that I'll expand on a little bit later that we can use to solve that problem, where you are dealing with a very complex system. You have to predict what the local, not just the local impact, but the system-wide impact or long-term impact is. And that complexity is too much for us in our mind. We can't fathom us. We can really benefit from technology. And the last one is a very interesting one. It's saying that the last type of mistake that we make when we use our intuition and judgment is when we are asked to use it and we haven't yet developed the intuition in that field. There's a common saying that we need about 10,000 hours of doing something, of repeating something, of making mistakes, of learning before we become an expert at something. Actually, the process that we go through is not learning by experience, but learning by experiment. And that's a big difference.
But I will change that in my vocabulary.
So if you really want to learn, don't try to think about learning from experience, because we often don't. But when you do an experiment, when you say, I'm going to develop this product, I'm going to try and sell it for this price. That's one of the assumptions, is that this is a fair price. So the more detailed I can make that experiment, the bigger the chances is that I can then learn from it, because I've explicitly stated all my assumptions around what is it that I want to learn. So that's the fourth problem, is what do I do if I'm put in an environment and I have to make a decision that's requiring intuition or judgment, but I haven't yet developed it. So those are the type of 4 decision mistakes. We underestimate how big of an impact the strong emotions have on our decision making. We underestimate how easily it becomes to be overwhelmed, and then we get lost. We don't realize to what extent the even small businesses are really complex, and it's very difficult to understand the full impact, system-wide impact of small changes that we make, especially if a small change can have a big impact. Like that pricing one that I've just shared. Imagine you're trying to do a post review and your profits have gone up by 20%, right? So you want to try, why? What happened, right? You'll be looking for some big change that happened. In the meantime, all that happened is your average selling price has gone up by 1% because you gave a little bit less discount, right? And that's what makes it, small changes can have big impact. And then this last part is, what do you do if you just haven't developed intuition, but you're asked to make these tough decisions that requires intuition and judgment?
I know that your lab is also worked on one app, and that helps people to make better, faster decisions. So when it really matters, like situations that we are here. So how can an app help someone make a better decision?
What we've done is, I've mentioned that there's 4 of these decision mistakes that we make that are avoidable and consequential. And we've developed an app for each of those. So if you go to our website, Golden Research Labs, or my personal website, DrAlanBarnard.com, you'll see these 4 apps. So the first one is a very simple app called Harmony Decision Maker. And this will help us to discover these exaggerated, fears and frustrations and expectations that can cause us to overreact or underreact. We commonly refer to those fears, frustrations, or expectations as limiting beliefs. So this app is very good by asking us all the right questions to help us discover what they are, and then to find out how to overcome and challenge them. So that's app number 1, Harmony Decision Maker.
I will make one remark. Dr. Caroline Makaka is with us on the call. So Caroline, I think that this is one very particular topic that we're discussing, where people need the help the most. Maybe this is one of the tools that we can actually share with our audience, and also that will help the people that we also are coaching one-on-one or consulting one-on-one. So and as there's so many people that really need help in that field today, especially today, then I think that would be something to remember. Just I wanted to do the remark now that she's also in the call and writes down.
Yes, and just to say to the viewers and listeners, we've created this app for, it's a free app, it's an award-winning app, it's available on all the mobile app stores, so they can download it immediately. It's called Harmony Decision Maker, and it will guide you for the whole process. So that's the first app. The second app is, how do you cope with being overwhelmed? So we've created another app called Harmony Change Maker, and that's when you already have a goal, and you need to break it up into, what are all the necessary and sufficient changes I have to make to reach this goal, and in what sequence do I implement them? And then how do I validate all the key assumptions, build a financial model, how to plan the execution of this, how to monitor the execution and do auditing. So that app is for these big organizational changes or big life changes, and that's called Harmony Change Maker. The third app we developed for this reason, where we're dealing with really complex systems, and it's very difficult for our minds to fully understand all the implications of that. So we've developed a range of simulation apps. For example, we have one for supply chains. So there today, organizations are using that app to be able to see what the impact of the coronavirus will be, that will have a massive impact on demand and supply. And they can literally use the app to simulate what will likely happen to the operational and financial performance of the business if, because of this change, this coronavirus, demand has actually gone completely down or up, or maybe supply has become constrained. Not only what's the implications, but also what's the best strategy to respond. So that app, there's a case study that I'll share with all the readers. Microsoft, for example, used that app in the first financial year that we started working with them. They were able to reduce their total inventories by over $250 million and increase sales by a few $100 million, just by using the app to decide, where could they do better and what's the simplest possible way. So that's our third app. And the last one we developed with a partner of mine. The company is called Merlin Technologies, and that's an artificial intelligence app, but it works very differently to traditional artificial intelligence apps. Rather than learning from data, this app has been designed to learn from human experts. So how do I overcome a problem when I have to make a decision that requires judgment and intuition and I haven't yet developed it? Imagine being a social worker and being sent to a family where the kids have suffered neglect or even abuse. And you have to make a tough judgment call about whether to leave the kids there or to take them away. I mean, you can imagine, and you've just started the job. You know, you haven't yet developed the intuition to be able to understand from the person's, you know, the parent's body language, etc., how to do that. Now, imagine you had the best social worker, maybe, you know, that woman that's got 30, 40 years of experience right next to you. And what this app can do, it's called Tom, can learn how the top human experts make those tough decision calls. And within just a couple of hours, it can learn the decision rules that they've developed that might have taken them 20, 30 years, extract those decision rules, make it available via an app to help novices achieve the same level of quality and speed of decision making. So those are the 4 apps that we've developed, each one specifically targeted at one of those 4 decision mistakes.
Wow, this is absolutely incredible, because I think I even think as I'm involved in so many different fields, like starting obviously from individual point of view, ending up having a business, ending up working with nonprofits. So you covered all those areas. So most probably need to go and take a look in each of them. So, but why did you end up doing this? Like, where did this passion come from?
You know, like I said, when I started this, I've just always been, you know, very fascinated about why some people become successful and others don't. And I realized that it was all about decision making. You know, if you can make better, faster decisions, if you can make less mistakes and especially less consequential mistakes, then you end up, you know, succeeding when others are failing. So that was where the passion came from. But I realized that what was the difficult situation was, how do we find out what's the reason why we make these decision mistakes, you know? So if you think about like a simple bottlenecks, why do resources become bottlenecks? Well, somebody made a bad decision. They've either wasted that scarce resource by letting it do stuff that it shouldn't be doing, or they've completely overcommitted. So then you say, okay, so bad decisions result in bottlenecks, but why do we make bad decisions? Because of some bad assumption or belief. And that was the thing that triggered my curiosity is, can we come up with very simple methods and apps to help anybody discover what those limiting assumptions or beliefs are? And then help them use the app to enhance their decision making, to make less of those avoidable mistakes.
I need to make a compliment, because usually when people are talking about, in the end of the day, it's really complicated how it's structured in a sense. But when you're able to really communicate and transmit in a way that how I need this thing and how I can benefit from that, then this is what you're able to convey. So I really love the way that you're not only a very great specialist on that field, but it's very interesting to listen to you, because you really like hooked and engaged, and you just want to know more and more and more.
One of the quotes that have inspired me throughout my whole life was a quote by a famous French physicist called Jean-Baptiste Perrin. And he said that the aim of all science is to substitute visible complexity with invisible simplicity. So if you think about, you know, a law like Einstein's theory of relativity, you know, E equal to mc squared. I mean, you couldn't imagine a simpler law, like a simpler algorithm. But so that's the inherent simplicity, but it explains so much visible complexity. And that's kind of what my drive is about decision making. When it comes to decision making, there's a lot of visible complexity. But behind all of that, there's actually incredible invisible simplicity. We make a decision and then we look for evidence to support it, you know, and we need to find a practical way of disrupting that process.
Can you give 3 recommendations, like how to really strive in the time of COVID-19?
The first thing is to prevent yourself from going into these vicious cycles, you know, between sort of procrastinating and then overreacting, procrastinating, And I think the coronavirus is an excellent example of how easily that could happen, right? There's so many uncertainties, so many unknowns, and then we get lost. So what my first advice is, when you're facing a situation where there's a lot of uncertainty and unknown, getting more certainty or more knowledge only matters if it will change the way that you respond to the situation, the way that you will either solve it, resolve it, cope with it, or capitalize on it, right? And like I mentioned, if you apply this to your own decision about what I should do as an individual, right, is that there's many uncertainties and unknowns, but the best way is to act as if I have it or those around me have it, right? To protect myself and to protect them. If I have a job or a business, we're all worried about whether I can lose my job. Is my business going to survive this? There's so many uncertainties and unknowns, but what can I do? Does it actually impact what I should be doing right now? No. Why? Because I need to make myself as helpful and as valuable as I can right now, whether it is for my company or my own business, and to use the time that we all have being at home to become even more helpful and more valuable in the future. So that to me is the first part, is to break that vicious cycle. When we're seeking certainty and information and knowledge, we go and watch the news and social media when in fact we probably already know what to do. So that's number one. Number two is literally to stop doing those things that don't matter a lot. And that's really hard, right? So a very simple exercise is think about what is the goal that you're trying to achieve in your own life with your business. And then go and write down all the things that's currently demanding your attention, or your budget, right? And be brutally honest, all the things that demands our attention, and, is that really helping a lot or not? And if it's not helping, stop it and focus on those high leverage things. And then I think the last recommendation, and this is a little bit biased because I'm so passionate about decision making and I know how easy it is to make this mistakes, is use this time to practice it. Decision science, decision science is something that requires action, right? We have to practice it. So we've created an app. It's for free. Download it. Play with it, give it to your kids to play with. It's like a muscle. The more we practice to learn how to make these really tough decisions, the easier it will become and the greater the chance that when we really need to make a tough decision, we'll know how to make the best possible decision in the shortest possible time.
Very well. Now the microphone can be open for questions. In this new world, how can you create a new pattern of good decisions?
Really good question. I think, as I mentioned, we now have the time to practice decision making, right? So like anything, the more we practice, the better we get. And that's what I've tried to do with my Harmony Decision Maker app, is that there's 5 steps that you go through in the app. And each of those steps have just been designed to prevent a common decision mistake. So for example, the first step starts off by saying, what's this dark cloud that you're facing, in your personal life or your business, right? Maybe I'm feeling very guilty because I keep on overspending or overeating, or, I'm facing a decision about whether to quit my job or maybe get out of a toxic relationship. And then it will ask you, so why is this decision or this problem that you're dealing with important to you? And you write your answer. And then why is it important to the people that you care about? And what the app then will do is it will then pause you and say, look at the reasons that you've written down there. We want to make sure that you don't focus on something that's unimportant. Are you worried about something that's unimportant or that you can't do anything about? Or maybe you are procrastinating on something that's really important. So it will say, look at what you've written there. If it's not that important, close the app down and get working on something that's important. But if it really is important, why do you keep on procrastinating? Do you realize just by taking an hour or two and really looking at this decision, you can make a massive breakthrough? And that's basically how the app works. It's broken it up into 5 simple steps. We're even testing it at schools now with kids of 10, 12 years old. So if it's simple enough for them to use, how do I deal with being bullied at school, or my grades are not good enough? How do I prepare better for that, or I have to make a big decision about which college to go to. So that's kind of how the app works. And we've tested it over the last few years with a range of audience. And that's kind of creating that new pattern, is to have a step-by-step process that I can apply to make any difficult decision that I'm making in my life.
So we have the addiction of distraction, as we just see as well. Yes. So where can you get the app? If you need the link, the links are going to be posted on Got Desk, How to Dominate the Decade, and World Women's Conference Award. But also you can find them in App Store.
Yes, right now they're available in all the app stores. So both the Google Play Store for those with Android smartphones and tablets, or in the Apple iTunes Store for those that have iPhones or iPads, and even in the Amazon Store. And all that they need to do is just type in Harmony Decision Maker, the full word, and the app will come up. It's a free app, and I can start using it immediately. There's also something very nice about the app, in that there's a community library in the app. So once you've done your analysis, you can also use the app to monitor your progress. So you can say not started, in terms of this decision that I've made, not started, in progress, completed, or achieved. And you can share your full analysis either privately or publicly with people, either anonymously or with your full name. So in our community library, maybe you're currently going through a very traumatic breakup in a business partnership or relationship, or you're having to deal with being overweight, or you're facing a tough decision. You can actually go into our community library and do a search, and it will find those users that have already faced this type of decision, and you can listen to their story. So you can actually hear their story. You can hear the interview between our virtual advisor and them. You can also see it in a graphical interface, and you can see what was the assumptions or beliefs they had to challenge, what was the breakthrough they came up with, and how did it turn out. And that's available also as part of the free app, this community library, so that we can start learning from each other as well.
That's beautiful. How many hours a week do you recommend to think the big decisions? Type number 2. There's the ones you mentioned are slow and more deliberate.
Right. So the research shows that we make, around 30,000 odd decisions every day, right? Most of those are made in fully automatic mode. What I eat, what I drink, how am I going to get to work, etc. The good news is that most of those don't matter, but there's a few that matter a lot, whether I get them right or wrong. So I think in terms of answering the question, 2 parts is that there's very few decisions that matter a lot. So when you're facing a decision, your first question would be, what will happen if I get this wrong? And what will happen if I get it right? Will it make a big difference? If the answer to either one of those questions are yes, it's time to sit down. The good news is when you follow a structured process, and especially if you guide it by an app and not just a workbook, the app basically helps to prevent that you get distracted, right? Because it keeps on asking you the right questions. You can literally make one of these big decisions within an hour or so. I facilitated a workshop last year at TED. It was part of the TED Summit. And the workshop I facilitated was called, How Do You Make Impossible Decisions? We had some of the most incredible minds in the world that you can imagine are very good at decision making and analysis. And they were staggered that within just an hour and a half, 90 minutes of really applying their mind, followed a very structured approach, they could come up with major breakthroughs of problems that they were challenged with for the last few months and sometimes the last few years. So that's other good news, is that, sort of a common motto for me is almost like that Geico ad, 15 minutes can save you 15%. Our sort of equivalent motto there is 60 minutes of just critical thinking guided by the app can save you a lifetime of regret. So that's the good news, is if you really have a structured way, these decisions can be done very quickly.
This is very profound and very deep. This is, wow. I think that as our mindset is that if we were able to help one person today, then our mission is completed. So I'm really sure that everybody who is watching, I see a lot of people actually looking at the live stream, which miraculously today works. So thank you for joining, everybody who's watching from my profile. Thank you for everybody who's watching under Coral Desk and also World Women's Conference and Ladies of All Nations International. So Alan, thank you very much. I think that soon you need to come back, because as whenever this is going to end, we would actually like to do the follow-up, because we could actually track down how many people started to use after this, watching this show, and where they are. So I would love to have you back. Let's see in a few months where we are. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your commitment, and thank you for servicing the community.
And thank you so much, Ragne, for the invitation. You're doing an amazing job, and you're adding so much value, especially in these tough times. I think, you know, we all have issues with decision making. There's so many uncertainties and unknowns. So it's a really, really important topic to talk about.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody who were watching.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.